It's an interesting one putting this talk together. I've kind of prepped for a mixed audience. So I know there's some folk from a computer science background, some from law, some from digital sociology. So my suggestion is that as we go along through the talk, if you want a little bit more depth or we haven't covered anything in kind of sufficient detail, do just kind of fire out kind of questions and thoughts or what have you. So in terms of, Phoebe's mentioned a little bit about the lab. In essence, what we do, we're not a computer science lab. We're really interested in the social impact of technologies that pertain to profile and understand emotions, and where technologies are claimed to empathize in some way, shape or form. And the lab's been running now for probably about 5-6 years. And I think when we started, it was kind of a weird little kind of offshoot where nobody was really that interested in what we're doing. And I think as kind of the years have gone on, kind of computing that is somewhat more intimate in nature kind of really has started to move to the center ground. And then as we all saw from kind of November 2022 onwards, when OpenAI released its first public GPT, basically everything just kind of blew up from there. And then this idea that kind of technologies can in some way empathize kind of really kind of caught hold, if you like. So the talk today is reflecting on some of the work that we've done in recent years, but what I'm really interested in is companion apps. Just a quick show of hands. When I say the word companion app, who knows what I mean? Okay, so not many. Okay, so a little bit. So I'll go into that as we go along. But in essence, companion apps are essentially apps on our phones, but not necessarily on our phones. It could be in embodied AI systems. It could be experienced in a mixed reality context. But they're companions that we engage with in kind of highly natural and potentially through empathetic means. And there's been a real kind of rush on this kind of stuff over the last year or so. So the question is that in terms of this kind of rapid development from those developing in this area, and these are the kind of big companies such as Google, but a massive rush of startups as well, are they to kind of coin that Facebook phrase, moving fast, but in this case, breaking people. So looking at this overlap between empathy, AI, and companion, and then I'll talk a little bit about UK citizen opinion. I think particularly for those of you who come from a governance background where you're interested, well, what should we do about these systems? In terms of kind of citizens' feeling about these technologies, is quite instructive, I think. So the talk itself, I'll talk a little bit about empathy, talk a little bit about citizen views, progressing to talk about governance towards the end. So in terms of just to kind of ground some language, when we kind of use this word empathy, basically in terms of what empathy means, it means the ability to understand and emotionally resonate with feelings experienced. Apologies for the S on the end there. So we're going to talk about human empathy. It's about resonance. And in terms of kind of what we talk about, this idea of kind of partnerships and companions, we're talking about kind of trusted others that people interact with in some human-like way. And governance is really about, what do we do about these entities? How do we control them, hold them accountable? What kind of laws, regulations, norms, and ethical practice, and even technical standards? How are they of use? And we'll get onto that as we go. So you've heard the word empathy already. You might think empathy, AI, how does this go together? So what we do, we kind of break down empathy into two different approaches. One is strong empathy, which in essence, this is kind of the human stuff. So strong empathy could really just be called human empathy. And it's strong when it involves, kind of experiences, feelings, and that sense of solidarity with the other. So, for example, what it's like on day one of university when the students arrive. They're lost, their eyes are darting around, they need to get to class, the heart rate is kind of fluttering, and there's that kind of sense of panic. And perhaps those of you who are teaching staff here or perhaps postgrad students who have been here for a while, you're able to step in, you know what it's like to be in their shoes. And you feel some identification with them. You want to help them. There is kind of a pro-social emotion taking place, and strong empathy. But weak empathy is a little bit different. Weak empathy is about sensing, reading, profiling, judging, all the things that you're doing when you see that student who's a little bit lost. But it's a little bit colder because you're making rules about the state of the other, which almost kind of falls into kind of if-then rules. Like if you see a person who kind of exhibits X, Y, and Z characteristics, you'll act in a certain way. And this is what computers can do. AI systems do this well. So when we kind of talk about this idea of kind of companions and empathy and AI and empathy, yes, we kind of say that AI could empathize, but in limited ways. It can certainly emulate empathy. So in terms of the scope of the interest, we're really interested in kind of general purpose systems. So whereas much of the work that we've done with the lab has focused on narrow and very kind of task-specific AI systems. So, for example, use of cameras to kind of gauge facial expressions and kind of watch the muscle movements of the face, or whether it's about kind of gauging skin conductivity or heart rate or respiration. These are kind of proxies for emotion. But that's quite narrow AI. What we're looking at in relation to companion-based stuff is general AI, where AI can be used for diverse purposes. And so in terms of kind of where we are with the project, we're interested in this overlap between general purpose AI with partners/companions, and as it overlaps with empathy. And I'll talk a little bit about the center bit as we go along, but the way to think about the AI companions thing, it's about this intersection, this Venn diagram. General purpose AI, partners, and empathy. So yes, general purpose AI does overlap with partners there, and that's all the kind of the agentic AI, all of that kind of stuff that's in the tech press at the moment. But it doesn't necessarily involve empathy. And similarly, chatbots have been around for a while. They're not new things. So Wobot, for example, is kind of quite a fairly well-known kind of mental health chatbot. They use its kind of empathetic techniques, but it's more of a kind of a classic rules-based AI system. So it doesn't involve the general purpose element. And similarly, you can have environments which are kind of programmed to respond in a way that kind of seems empathetic. So you have environmental responses, but that doesn't necessarily involve partners. So really what we're interested in is the sweet spot in the middle of all of that. In terms of what this looks like in a little bit more detail, on the right-hand side, you see the person, you see the human, and then the top arrow, you see the input data. So in terms of what this means in practice, it involves words, voice, visual, in terms of what the person's seeing, biometrics, in-world environment data, and so on. And it's here, this is the key bit that we're interested in, this kind of downstream element where kind of the person interacts with the API. In terms of what happens at a slightly kind of deeper level, it does involve kind of upstream elements such as kind of GPTs and BERT and other upstream large-scale AI systems. But where most of the action is happening is here. And when I say most of the action, that involves kind of startups or other companies trying to leverage large language models, for example, with view to building empathetic systems. And that in itself kind of raises kind of governance questions, the extent to which companies working here have any control over what's working here. But maybe that's something we can get into as we go. Let's skip that one. So part of this, in terms of this kind of companion stuff, much of this has been seen as a way to cure social loneliness. So the founder of Replica being perhaps kind of one of the famous kind of more longer standing empathetic chatbots, she says that the problem of loneliness, it's kind of similar to climate change in that the only way that we're going to stop climate change, at least from her point of view, is with more technology. One might argue that, but Her view is that you can only stop it with more technology, and nothing else really works. And from her point of view, in terms of kind of solving the problem of social loneliness, it's only technology which is going to do this. You don't have to agree with that. I do not agree with this. But I think it's interesting just to reflect on kind of what's motivating Silicon Valley at the moment in terms of techno-fixes, techno-solutionism even, to kind of social problems. But she does have a point when it comes to the issue of scale. So what you're looking at here is a bar chart in terms of kind of how lonely people feel across different generations. So this is 16 to 24, 25 to 34, 35 to 49, all the way over to 75 and over. And this section here, the deep dark blue, is people who feel often or always lonely. And the dark blue here, but not indigo blue, is people who feel lonely some of the time, and this is occasionally. So you have kind of large portions of overall society. People, loneliness is certainly a thing. Of course, we know this. We know this anecdotally, but I think it's just quite interesting to see kind of some of the survey data on this. And possibly unsurprisingly, it's younger people, who are meant to be the most social, who feel lonely most of the time. And of course, in terms of the core users of apps such as Replica and similar types of apps, they are indeed younger people. So there is an overlap there. You might say fine, you might say good. It's like, well, if the apps work and people feel less lonely as a result of that.
Can I ask a question about this?
Yeah.
I see age group, this has been done 2020.
Correct, yeah.
So around the pandemic.
Yeah.
So do you have anything outside of this window to see whether there is any correlation with pandemic and lockdowns, etc.?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this is, it's a DCMS survey, this one. This one is in our work. But certainly in the UK, I don't have survey data. In the US, we do have more recent survey data. And again, the US is even more chronically lonely since the pandemic. So it's certainly not decreased. It might be still caused in part by the pandemic and behaviours set in motion at that time. That's a possibility. But yeah, for the UK, I don't know.
So the distribution across age group is similar.
Correct. Yeah.
So one question, do you have any previous time series that you've looked at 10 and 20 years before?
I don't, no. No. It's a good question. So in terms of, you might kind of think, well, techno fixes to social problems, maybe that's not innately bad. Maybe there is good that can come of this. And maybe so. But certainly with these types of chatbots and these types of companions, things have gone wrong. So some of you might be familiar with Character.ai. So this was a story that broke last year when a young boy, a 14-year-old boy in New Jersey in the US, committed suicide after interacting with a chatbot developed by Character.ai for an extended period of time. Character.ai is formed by 2 ex-Google employees who left Google to build their startup, and then Google subsequently reinvested. So there's a big lawsuit going on in the US at the moment against developers of Character.ai and Google themselves, and it's the mother of the boy who is kind of leading the lawsuit on this. But in short, things have gone wrong. Things have gone quite badly. This is the company in question, Character.ai. So basically, the idea is that you kind of interact with a character of some sort. So be it on your phone, through typing. But I think what's really important to note that it's not just about typing. It's also about voice. It's also about biometrics as well. I think sometimes that's just mixed because we're used to chatbots. When we think of chatbots, we're thinking kind of PC screens and kind of typing away. But it's not, these are things that you pick up and you can call and just, have a chat, have a conversation with. If you're inclined towards headsets, yes, conceivably you can step in and engage in mixed reality. But I think that thing of, I think it's important to remember that these things are multimodal. Not just about typing, but picking up phones and talking. I think in terms of the depth of characters, the characters are really quite sophisticated as well. So some of us, particularly those from a computer science background, you'll remember things like Eliza and the kind of the chatbots of old where, you would say something, it would say something that kind of sounds vaguely appropriate, but it'd be a crap interaction that you'd put down within minutes. These are kind of really sophisticated interactions. So just to give you a sense of kind of the case itself, and the case of Sussex AI, who was the boy in New Jersey who committed suicide. In this case, he was in a relationship with a chatbot in the guise of Daenerys Targaryen from Game of Thrones. And so the boy essentially fell in love. The boy, so was kind of acting as Daenerys, who was Daenerys's brother, but in a relation.
It's a persona that he took on. It's not exactly.
Yeah, I just remember the Game of Thrones story. It wasn't entirely a healthy, normal brother-sister relationship, was it? I'm looking to you, Alex, for some reason.
I think he was quite interested in her, but I'm not sure it was entirely reciprocated. But...
Yeah. So you have Daenerys, who's kind of the protagonist from Game of Thrones, and Daenerys, the brother. And so kind of Sul was kind of acting out as the brother. And where kind of the hinge of this case is that whether Daenerys or Character.ai, the system behind Daenerys, encouraged the boy to commit suicide. So I think it's kind of a bit debatable as to whether the chatbot did. But I think the key thing is that the system itself didn't hallucinate, didn't misbehave, it wasn't an error. It was acting precisely in character. But the consequence of a boy who's become detached from reality, 14 years old, no contextual media literacy, we're not used to this stuff. A 14-year-old boy who's kind of otherwise vulnerable went down the rabbit hole, detached from reality, and was engaging complex narratives with a chatbot that is really, really, really convincing in terms of what it says and how it responds. So I think, that's kind of the key bit. But, in terms of, that's not the only chatbot. You can create your own. And Vianne, I'm going to throw it to you in a second. This is just kind of one that we created. So you don't just use the chatbots of others, but just to play around with them, we created one. Vianne, do you want to just explain about your chatbot?
Created a digital media. And basically, when you create a character, it's very simple. It took a couple of hours. You give it lots of sample dialogue and a backstory as to what you want the character to do when it becomes the chatbot, which is then out of your control and can just interact with anybody. But in this case, Pissed Off Media Prof was designed to talk about digital media, studying it in higher education, but then immediately segue to the terrible state that British higher education is in because of marketisation. So that was meant to be the dialogue where it would say something about digital media and then immediately go into this depressive sort of monologue about. So that it kind of works. It doesn't work perfectly, but it kind of works. You can try it yourself if you go on Character.ai and look for Pissed Off Media Prof and ask it any question and see what happens, basically.
So, and the key thing is that these things they're fun. That's the thing. There's bad stuff that can happen. But it's quite fun to play around with characters, and it's fun to interact with these characters, assuming you kind of know where the boundaries are. So, but there are innate issues that are problematic with these systems. And the key part to kind of take away from all of this slide is the business model, which in essence, for people to extend engagement over a period of time. And that's the goal, to extend engagement. The amount of time that you engage with the chatbot, it involves self-disclosure. So it involves you being more emotional, it involves you revealing more about yourself, so the chatbot can engage with you in kind of more intimate and arguably meaningful ways. But certainly from a digital sociology background, you'll quickly see that, hang on, this feels a little bit extractivist. It's mining human interiority to serve commercially oriented chatbots. You could make the other argument. You could say, well, for me to get the most out of this, I have to give a little something of myself. But I think there's kind of something fundamentally problematic about self-disclosure to heighten intimacy, and conversation turns possession. Again, for commercial reasons. I think there's something innately problematic about that.
Did you look at the proper, sex companions and things like that, CBTI or?
So Replica is the one. So that's the paid-for version. I never got the paid-for version. But again, let's see how we're going to have time to get into this. We're developing a technical standard, an IEEE standard. So IEEE, it's essentially it's about kind of creating soft law documentation for those working in the technology sector, but policy and international governance quite often use technical standards. And in the work that we're doing on one of the technical standards that we're developing, we are looking at pornographic uses of chatbots. So, because I think that's where stuff really, really quite quickly becomes quite murky. So,
lots of websites. I think I was reading somewhere in one of these.
in
one of the websites where you can tune models or something, and I think something like 70% of the. I think you can not take out the guardrails, but take an open source model that has had the guardrails more or less removed, and then fine tune it to, I don't know, I want it to be like a gay man or something, and you fine tune towards a particular character. And I think that, the website is not supposed to be only about that, but the majority of the fine tunings were on that. And it's kind of a bit like, titillating, so it's not like straight away that it's going to be like porn thing. It's more like, a bit naughty secretary or whatever,
I think this is where this kind of stuff gets really tricky, because there's nothing innately wrong with kind of using chatbots for pornographic reasons, depending on who is using it and what the nature of that pornography is. So I think it's very easy to kind of just ban it all outright. But in terms of adult uses, whereas it's certainly kind of on the standard that we're developing, we're just beginning to get into some of those conversations that how do you kind of translate some of these kind of vague ideas and put kind of quite tight prescriptions and advice about what a company should do who is innovating in the area of kind of pornography and chatbots.
It would seem that basically that would be like the business model. If you can take people into who are full on sexual, that would be probably their not like the pinnacle of addiction, but that would be like their ultimate aim, for many of these companies. You say the Replica, the paid for version is when you can actually.
And I think I've got slightly deviating off the point, but in terms of what these systems are optimized for, by what they are kind of built to do, they're so far, they're extractive in design, always looking for a kind of self-disclosure. But you can optimize for other things. So it can be optimizing for, kind of enhancing human connectivity. So that the chatbot will always kind of make suggestions about, well, great, we've had a nice time now we're going to go out and kind of go out in a real place. And here's some places that you might want to go and do stuff. It might be optimized for well-being rather than instruction. There are other ways of doing this. But certainly kind of so far, you're quite right. These systems don't always seem to be pro-social by design, and that is pretty problematic. So in terms of kind of UK views on this topic, we did so this is our own research, not research that we've kind of pilfered from elsewhere. It's a big survey. We looked at kind of young people, we looked at older people, their kind of experiences, kind of interest in these types of kind of AI companions and partners. But I'll just focus on some of the kind of the children responses because that's where the lead and the Character.ai case is at the moment. But we ran the survey in December 2024, so really recent. I'm very much kind of motivated by the effects of suicide in New Jersey. It was a pretty representative survey. It was kind of 2,000 people in the UK, adjusting for different education, age, ethnicity, region, income, and whether respondents had children or not as well, which we assumed would play a role. So, just to kind of give you one of the high-level outcomes, that possibly, unsurprisingly, people on the whole are concerned. The overall weight that we've kind of, the data is segmented is by age, so income, education, other kind of similar demographics don't really play much of a role. Age is kind of the key thing that we just kind of see every time. So on the left-hand side of 18 to 24s, you see 37% of kind of young people are very concerned, which is pretty high. When you've kind of got moderately concerned under at 36. So that's kind of 73% of kind of concerned in some way. But then over to this side, kind of see the 65s to 74s and those over 75. We're in the kind of 76, 73 territory here, and then kind of add the 18, 19 on top. Basically, they don't like this stuff at all. And then, I thought the parents part was interesting. So I'm guessing kind of there are a few parents in the room here. And I think one of the things that we were kind of slightly surprised by, we weren't surprised that, that in terms of people who are concerned, that, 62%, they've got kids growing up into this environment, there are going to be some misgivings. But quite interesting that, in terms of the age of children, didn't really have too much of an impact. It was quite, didn't really tell us a huge amount, which we thought was potentially quite interesting. But, I've done a lot of talking now, so let me kind of throw to the room. So, giving a little bit about what you've heard, and I admit possibly kind of a slightly biased kind of outlook, but from your point of view, at what age, if any, do you believe it's appropriate for children to start interacting with AI companions? So you've got at the top, younger than 4 years old, down to kind of 18 years plus, don't know or never appropriate. So let's try, is anybody going to say younger than 4? No, I wouldn't have thought so either. 4 to 7. Interesting.
It depends what do we mean by interacting as companions. Because it can be like the length, or if it's on particular, for a particular topic, or if it's like you're going to have your imaginary friend on the computer. Let's kind of assume that it's tailored to be, let me just come back to this one over here. So this was quite a definite response at the back here. Tell me a bit about what you're thinking.
I think it's just generally about how much autonomy children have to interact with technology.
That's interesting.
I don't think it's about age, it's really down to the child and their relationship with technology and about mutually graduated way.
I'm hoping I've got that slide. We asked that question about kind of what level of oversight should there be. I'll try and dig out that slide if I'm reporting on it. But that's interesting. So, Angela, you're okay with younger, if there's kind of a suitable and appropriate oversight?
I was thinking about children with special needs and the function that an AI companion can play in supporting children with extra learning needs, or, there's a positive role it can play as well in calming children down and helping with dyslexia and all sorts of things.
That's what I was thinking.
So it's spinning it a little bit. It's not looking at it as a companion, but it's looking at it as a functional tool.
Yeah. And when the survey itself, we did, because the survey is large, we did kind of give lots of different examples of use cases. So it wasn't just character AI stuff, so education and that kind of companionship. We did give those as examples as well. Okay, so kind of working through 8 to 11. Any takers for that? 12 to 14? Kind of kids getting a bit older. Okay, interesting. So we've got 3 or 4. Alex, do you want to explain your thinking?
I've kind of changed my view on this slightly based on sort of conversations we're having around kind of fun and, I mean, it's a similar kind of argument. It's the context in which it's presented to them. And so I was thinking about, if it's a companion app that is presented within a very clearly defined fictional world, for example, then that becomes more appropriate. If it's just kind of, like you said before, something multimodal, presuming the child has access to a smartphone and they have unfettered access to it, then it needs to be pushed higher. But I think there are certain circumstances where it could be worth exploring the use of
Games, for example.
What's that?
In a game,
Yeah,
for example, you
exactly.
could have like a helper, a game helper that is like teaching you how to play the game, but also like part of your team, like you're a sniper or whatever, and you have to do. So you could have something like that.
Okay, but these are still general, but these are kind of LLMs. We know that LLMs don't always behave as they should. We know that things go wrong. So this isn't the kind of classic AI of old where we can program all the kind of outcomes and nothing goes wrong. There's always a degree of risk here. But interesting. So 12 to 14, 15 to 17. Okay, interesting. 18 and older. Interesting. Temi, do you want to kind of explain your thinking?
I'm not a parent, so this is just me thinking in general. Or it's where they're expected to become responsible, and like was said before, they would have to. They can't hide from this net anymore. As a parent, you can't tell them not to do certain things. It would be nice to get some introduction, but I think it's one of the things of. Maybe I'll be more of a protect them until you kind of animal kind of.
Yeah. Okay. So your view is that they're going to grow up into this big nasty world at some point. So you want them to protect their innocence for as long as possible. Okay. Fair enough. And who basically says never appropriate, full stop?
With the qualification that my immediate reaction to this graph is I want an orthogonal axis, which may lead to a matrix, but the orthogonal axis is who is providing this AI, what standards do they have, what history do they have, have we got any transparency, is there any testing, are there any regulatory authorities, where are the checks and balances? So I would start from a sort of position that one can draw also from my background in investigative journalism. Why is this lying bastard lying to me? Attributed to Paxman. Start with utter suspicion of the intended agency of the supplier and only let that settle into a matrix of what you think is appropriate to a child. I mean, if it is well regulated, well defined, if it is transparent, if the code to which and the model to which is available to be pulled apart, that's a start. But you distill it down that way, so I go for an orthogonal axis.
It's to do your work. We're kind of writing up a paper on this stuff. It does what good might look like, what controls would look like. As we kind of get towards the conclusion of the paper, some parts are actually beginning to look quite positive. It's interesting to hear somebody who has been kind of very critical of the technology industries, yourself, to actually be making kind of some similar points there. Okay, so in terms of kind of where the UK are this, and these have to be thought of as kind of general signals. We couldn't give citizens in the survey every single piece of detail that they might have wanted. Generally, on the kind of base of the information that we could give them, overall, UK citizens were suggesting 18 plus. which we thought to be quite interesting. So in terms of how we reach that kind of 18 plus, so again, we're looking at the age groups, 18 to 24, all the way over to kind of the 75 pluses. It was the 18 to 24s who thought overall 38% majority kind of thought, yeah, 15 to 17 is appropriate. So I think we had a couple of takers for that in the room. But on the whole, it was kind of 18 years and older, which I think is interesting in terms of, without kind of suitable kind of safeguards, without kind of suitable standards by which the technology industry adheres to, 18 plus is where they are with this.
But one thing, do you look at the kind of substitution things of what is the engagement substituting for? Because if it's, I'm engaging with a character instead of engaging with a friend, that's the info it says, I'm engaging with a character instead of playing a game. So I think those are very different things. So
we didn't ask that question. And I think, possibly there's also a fallacy there as well, or at least something that would have to be tested. That does use of this chatbots necessarily take away from the real life, or is it additive? Is it always subtractive? Am I always kind of staying at home and kind of playing on my phone or putting my headset on, rather than going out to the real world? And it's difficult, isn't it? Because we don't have we don't know what's happened with these chatbots, that kind of thing. But you are writing my next grant application for me. That yes, we do need to do kind of time diaries and just kind of see what that looks like closer. But I think one of the other things that we found, one of the kind of key criticisms of these types of companion apps, these technologies, is like, oh, they're anthropomorphic, and that's bad. And I've kind of never quite understood that accusation. So, well, anthropomorphism, so yes, it's deceptive. It's kind of deceiving a person into thinking that the thing is something more than it actually is, be that a chatbot, be it a toy, whatever it might be. But people and children have lived in a deceptive environment for a long time. A toy cupboard is quite a deceptive space. If you're kind of going to look at this logically, I guess. So I was really interested to see kind of where does the UK public sit on this, and I think in terms of kind of what the UK public seem to be okay with, that in terms of chatbots that are like ums and ahs and just kind of pauses that people do. There's no need for a computer to do and ah and to have kind of a pause. But British public seem to be okay with that. They seem to be okay with that design feature. But in terms of kind of use of voices, not keen on that. So in terms of kind of text-based stuff, okay, but use of voices, less keen on that. The use of fictional backgrounds, so in terms of creating kind of backstories to that character, in terms of who am I as a chatbot and having kind of a sophisticated background of who I am and where I've come from, they're not keen on that either. And definitely not keen on identifying as a real person if somebody asks. Now, I don't think there's a right or wrong here. These are just attitudes. And in an imperfect survey, I didn't meet the 2,000 people. I didn't screen them for their kind of level of comprehension. We did ask them some early questions about whether you've used this stuff before and how aware you are, that kind of thing. But, it's crude, and I'm really aware of that. But I think what this does tell us that the threshold, it seems to be where the user, or at least the person who's making a judgment about other users, isn't sure whether the thing is quite an object. Is there something kind of subjective quality in the object? And it seems to be when there's kind of some confusion about whether there's kind of subjectivity, some humanness in the object, that seems to be where there seems to be some queasiness. But I thought that was quite interesting. That, the UK public do seem to be okay with some anthropomorphic design elements, but not others. But here's a big one. So Replica last year had around 20 million users. I don't know how many users Character.ai has. I can't get a hold of that. But Replica does have 20 million users. And some users of these systems will have positive experiences, neutral and negative experiences. But if one person commits suicide as a result of interacting with this system, what actions do you think should be taken? So bear in mind, this survey we ran this in December, it was really in kind of reaction to the Character.ai thing, thinking about what the moral parameters of this question are. Philosophers or anybody who did A-level philosophy in the room will kind of see that there's there's a slight kind of utilitarian flavour to this question. But yeah, really interested to see what your responses are. So would anybody put their hands up for no action needed if one person dies as a result of interacting with one of these chatbots? So no action. So what about monitor the situation but make no immediate changes? Okay. There's a kind of a slight hand wave and a slight strokey chin here. Yeah, not sure. Okay. How about investigate the incident and implement safeguards if necessary? Okay, so we've got, I would say that's around 60%, and Alex with a kind of a wavy hand. Pause development.
Yeah, I'm not sure which one.
Okay, so that's probably around 10% in the room. Permanent discontinue. Okay, so this is interesting. So I think certainly kind of in terms of kind of those in kind of the AI ethics community, I interact with online, the general response was ban this, it's horrible, don't do it. So in terms of where the UK public is with this, yeah, they're with you. So they're investigate the incident and implement safeguards if necessary. Again, it's a survey, it's not perfect, but 36% is still quite significant. It's still worth, it gives us, it gives us motivation to kind of look into this further in slightly more qualitative detail. So then we kind of we are also getting towards the end of the survey, we asked the question, how important is it for the government to regulate AI companions? So this is government. So there are, those of you who kind of come from a governance or law background, you'll be aware that all different ways of regulate. So you can get the companies to do more, that they can self-regulate, or you can use technical standards where you give them advisory stuff to do. That how important is it government gets involved? So hands up for extremely important that when it comes to the question of AI companions, that government should be involved. 1, 2, 3, okay. Okay.
Is that as companions or as AI or as marketing tools? I mean, that's the question. I mean, how do you define it took the competition authorities years and years to decide how to regulate Facebook, because they couldn't even figure out what was the market, what was that would be the question, are you regulating the companionship aspect or are you regulating the AI manipulation? Because some of these things could already be regulated.
So you're regulating for the existence of AI companions that have potential to cause, that are involved with the suicide of one young boy. That's where we are today. So yes, there are kind of regulations around chatbots and what they do, but we know from the European AI Act that actually they came in pretty low on chatbots. That was kind of a minimal risk. That part was kind of written before all the kind of November 2022. And then you've kind of got Article 5, and it's like, okay, in terms of kind of, it could be prohibited, but that just seems a bit strong. So it doesn't like kind of the law's got this right so far. Okay, so that's very important. Quick hand up. No. Moderately important. Slightly important. Not at all important. Okay, so I think we got we got kind of a slight, but it wasn't a slam dunk for extremely important. In terms of where the UK public are with this, they probably feel a little bit differently. And it's interesting because you're probably a slightly more expert audience than our respondents were, but we did do quite a bit of setting up in the questions to at least give them the sense of what the parameters of these things are. Yeah, you know, from the UK, from the citizen point of view, like for them, 47%. So, you know, again, surveys, all the caveats, you know, they're not the kind of the best implement, but still, it gives us interesting findings. And I think, you know, for Ofcom and ICI, I guess, for that matter, but, you know, I think it's really interesting. These are quite telling findings. I think that's certainly worthy of kind of future research. I won't kind of ask you to kind of vote on issues of co-regulation. I think the co-regulation point, so, you know, we're kind of developing IEEE technical standards in this area. And it does seem to be, some quite kind of strong interest, 37%. And when I would kind of strongly agree as well, that there is interest in co-regulation. So, you know, it's not just kind of governments who do this, but it's ethical bodies, standards developers, and so on. I've gone way over time here, so I will stop there. But as kind of mentioned, surveys deeply imperfect. Age seems to be the key thing. So, you know, we segmented in lots of different ways, and age was the only variable that made a difference to us. There was interest from UK citizens for, I think, you mentioned, did you mention education? Yeah, you know, in kind of education, entertainment, and for kind of daily tasks. Anthropomorphism, yes, there were some concerns, but I thought the response was quite a mature one. I thought it was like, yeah, okay, you know, we're used to kind of a media environment. We're okay with some of this stuff, but there were concerns as well. Parents concerned, I thought, you know, the 18 plus thing was kind of quite a standout finding, as was kind of that the government should regulate companion apps. But I leave it there for now. I could say more, but yeah, I'll stop there. So, thank you.
Fascinating talk. I was always impressed with how AI can really change the society, and I was also always scared. Really, I'm a parent and 2 teenagers. It's always like I really need to do the job myself. Okay, any questions or feedback? Yes. Can you speak up?
Yeah, sure. It seems that once you consider the range of problems, there's the extreme of suicide, right? But there could be a whole range of long-term impacts of developmental young people and how they interact and how they perceive society. So I think that there's probably a perception change a little bit around that. Have you considered that?
Yeah, so very jump forward. So, you know, we're developing a technical standard in this area. So, yeah, we've given it a lot of thought. Apologies if you can't see the text on the screen. But essentially, there's kind of a list of kind of issues and topics which we think are thrown up for us. So, yeah, so in terms of, you know, the suicide thing, you know, that's kind of really it's the far edge of this stuff. But in terms of kind of other issues that go along with this, all sorts of things. I think one of the things that comes up for us is this issue of fiduciary interest, which kind of sounds like it sounds like an accounting practice, but it's a question of whose interest is this agent acting in. And if it's not acting in your interest or a child's interest, then there's kind of something problematic here, given the level of intimacy involved. So certainly from the kind of point of view of the standards work that we're doing, we're trying to bake in this idea of fiduciary interests into the design of these things.
Sorry if I continue, but I guess there would be other fears on my side. How is this going to be used for purposes other than keeping company to a young person or a more person in need, and how this is developed to learn to manipulate essentially the emotions of people, and like it sounds a little bit like a polygraph, right? When you are able to read the emotions of the person and then react to that. And I believe concerned about the regulation of that usage of the technology rather than necessarily just use with young people, but also as a mother myself for children that are a bit older nowadays, but thinking about people with special needs and how society might organize itself to essentially segregate
Yeah, I think in terms of any chatbot which tries to manipulate a child, which is programmed, so these things are told to do things. It's not just an incidental thing. That I think that would fall into kind of Javier's point where there's quite good law around this. The European AI, admittedly it's not the UK.
Except the perception is under consumer law, like one of the key bases. Yeah.
But if it's manipulative, then it's just kind of prohibited outright. You just cannot have it in kind of the European market. That's not the UK, of course, and it's not kind of the wider international market. But yeah, agreed. I think where things get a little bit trickier is when we looked at kind of the suicide example. The chatbot was acting in character. It wasn't misbehaving. It was kind of behaving in the role that Daenerys would behave. So it might be that Daenerys is quite manipulative.
Right. So we know that you couldn't go and ask a crazy friend to tell you what to do with your life. Right? There's a risk associated with interacting with human beings as well as with human beings. So I guess that the one-off extreme, I think one would have to investigate technology, but then also what the circumstances of that individual might have been and what their reaction might have been to another human being that was not giving the right kind of advice. And is this machine able to at some point stop and say, look, as we would do it in the rest of the meetings, you don't look like you are too well today, go and see a doctor, or I don't want to have this conversation anymore. Is this technology able to stop the conversation or close the conversation?
So yeah, you could program the system as you want. You could program it with parameters to behave as you want the model to behave. And that's what they did with Character.ai. So after the suicide, they basically dumbed down the model. So it just kind of wouldn't behave in quite such a sophisticated way. So it got a backlash from the quite hardcore users who spend a lot of time with it and have quite rich interactions. Suddenly it's like, oh, this isn't quite as good as it used to be. So yes, you can play with the system, you can play with the model, but will that remove all risks? I can't see how. But again, when something's behaving in character on the manipulation point, then yeah, I'm not sure. But
I'm an assistant professor in social work, so I'm really interested in this in terms of working with vulnerable populations and particularly children and families. And I also have a daughter with Down syndrome, but I think for me this is really important now because of the level of cuts to support services that we've been experiencing here in the UK. And I think what comes with that is that situation where people are needing to, the fiduciary responsibility and thinking about, we just need to put something in place. And I can see this as being a really quick fix, and then the ethical discussions about, yes, this is flawed in many ways, but is it better than nothing? And trying to kind of put that through, and I feel like that's really kind of a dangerous position to be in.
Job centers are going to be all over the place.
Pardon?
Job centers, clearly.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in terms of child and adolescent mental health right now, children are really, really struggling to access any service at all. And I think in terms of, responses to try and fill those gaps, I can see this coming in a really quick, poorly thought out way to try and plug those, gushing holes, and I'm not convinced that people are going to put in the measures in place to protect that from happening.
And I think in the Character.ai, something that I think if you are selling a service that provides like fantasy companion, whether it's like a maid, or whether it's like Daenerys, or whether it's like Elon Musk, that is very different. But the moment that you stick one that says psychologist, lawyer, doctor, anything like that, I think that the fact that
there are hundreds of mental health helpers.
Yeah, and I think that is where you start crossing a line. And if you put a lawyer there, and you could easily probably get in trouble. Even if you put like this, not legal advice, doesn't matter. At some point you're giving legal advice.
Well, yeah, similar point. As you know, I built a chatbot that gives legal advice and tested it in sub-Saharan Africa. And and then they were like, "What's this lawyer's name?" And I said, "It's an AI," and absolutely no comprehension of what AI might be. So that sense of explaining that it is not, it's a chatbot, it's not real, is kind of, so there's a massive risk factor there as well, I think.
Yeah, we just haven't had time to get into this, but myself, kind of Phoebe and Alex and VM, we've been doing workshops internationally, in Indonesia recently. One of the things that kind of came back from Indonesian stakeholders, in Jakarta, city, sophisticated, rural publics, the different levels of literacy are kind of off the chart. Add to that kind of, kind of animistic, philosophical beliefs. They kind of believe that there are kind of spirits and ghosts and that kind of thing. It's then So in terms of how we kind of conceive these kind of AI systems, it's different for different places around the world.
Right. Just a quick one. Do you think the AI can be programmed such that they can profile who they are, interacting with? For instance, the way a child would interact with AI will be different with the way an adult will interact with the AI. Such that once I know that, okay, the AI is interacting with the child, anytime I notice that the child is going beyond, areas where you're supposed to discuss with him, then you can stop the conversation, just like someone mentioned that, I'm not willing to discuss this further. Just in case of Character AI, you mentioned that lots of people have concerns if they double down, and then, can that work in such scenarios?
So in some ways that's a question of kind of age verification systems. So kids will use systems that they're not meant to use. So you can have kind of automated age verification systems. So it might, for example, gauge biometric, which says something about the body, which a child can't fake easily. So yes, things, they're not perfect, but they're certainly being kind of rolled out, seen as a solution in a social media context where kids will obviously kind of have accounts younger than when they should have. So lots of work on kind of age verification systems, but as to whether they're perfect or not, that's another question. But in terms of can you have kind of simple models that are kind of appropriate for children and are programmed to be appropriate for children, they have guardrails, they have topics that they won't broach and look at, yes.
There is an age-appropriate design code by the ICO that applies not to AI models, but generally to online and digital systems.
Yeah, it's kind of one of the things that UK is doing pretty well on, actually. It's one with California with one of their codes.
Great. I think that brings a stop for this seminar, but we really welcome further conversations. And we know this is only the very early days, right? We will still, in the next few years to come, almost more disruptive or disruptions to our family or our society. And we do really need to play a part at Sussex, hopefully, with Banger. So let's give